The Tournament of Roses Parade. For more than a century, this event has been one of the foremost New Year's Day celebrations and a magnificent picture of floral pageantry. In this next hour, we'll present rare images of spectacular Rose Parade moments. We'll explore how the show-stopping floral floats have evolved over the years. And we'll bring you historical highlights of movie stars and heroes as they grand marshal this extraordinary festival steeped in American and world history. This is the Rose Parade through the years.
Hi, I'm Rob Weller, and welcome to Rose Parade Through the Years. The Tournament of Roses Parade has taken place in Pasadena, California every New Year's Day since 1890. It's quite the tradition. In fact, it's become known as America's New Year's Day celebration. Well, today we're going to look at the history of this remarkable event, the grandest all-floral parade in the world.
It all began in 1889 when Pasadena zoologist Charles F. Holder convinced other members of the Valley Hunt Club to sponsor a New Year's Day celebration. Holder wanted to tell other regions of the United States that while they were hip-deep in snow, Pasadena was abundant with roses and ripening citrus. Dr. Francis Rowland, whose wife had just returned from a rose festival in Nice, France, suggested the idea of a Battle of Roses. So in late 1889, an invitation went out to all the citizens of Pasadena. It read, "Ladies and gentlemen are requested to bring with them to the park on New Year's Day all the roses possible, so that strangers and tourists may have the full benefit of our floral display." Setting the standard for years to come, on January 1st, 1890, citizens gathered with horses and carriages and held a stunning floral display that attracted an audience of 3,000. This was Dr. Rowland's entry, which won first prize. The afternoon was filled with foot and pony races, a tug of war, jousting, and tourney of rings, a Spanish game in which mounted horsemen tried to spear 3 rings hung 30 feet apart. This tourney of rings, coupled with the abundance of roses, was the inspiration for the name Tournament of Roses. In the second year, 1891, the Valley Hunt Club made another effort to impress visiting Easterners with Pasadena's beauty. They called the festival the Dead of Winter, which it was for much of the country. Pasadena, however, was again in bloom, and all community members were invited to enter horses and carriages embellished with flowers, preferably roses. The Monrovia Town Band added music to the parade, starting a marching band tradition carried on by hundreds of musicians in every parade since. In 1892, a severe winter storm damaged the majority of rose bushes. With a lack of roses available for decorations, the Hunt Club nearly changed the name of the parade to the Orange Tournament, but the Rose Parade survived. Each year, the event became larger than the last, and with each parade came something new. A highlight of the 1893 parade was the bifurcated skirt. This allowed women to straddle a horse rather than ride side saddle. It's created a lot of talk about whether this was a graceful and becoming act. The 1895 parade was the last to be sponsored by the Valley Hunt Club. Staging the festival had grown to be more than the club could handle. So at a public meeting, the citizens of Pasadena formed a permanent organization called the Pasadena Tournament of Roses Association, which assured the continuation of the grand event. This is the earliest motion picture footage of the Rose Parade known to exist. It was shot by the Thomas Edison Company in 1898 and preserved only on a paper original. Entering the 20th century 2 years later, the Vitascope Company then produced a motion picture of the parade and shared it with audiences nationwide. New Year's Day 1901 marked the entry of the automobile in the Tournament of Roses parade. 5 decorated autos chugged along as the last participants, purposely separated from the equestrian units to prevent the horses from being frightened. The automobile had been invented only 2 years earlier, and these provided quite the innovative spectacle. A record 18,000 people came to Pasadena by rail to enjoy the parade. A novel idea for post-parade entertainment highlighted the 1902 celebration. the tournament's first East meets West football game. Tournament officials convinced Michigan's undefeated, in fact, unscored upon team to travel west to play Stanford. Michigan humiliated the West Coast representatives with a score of 49-0. This disappointment put an end to tournament football for 14 years. 2 years later, the tournament came up with an idea for a post-parade event that would replace the football game: chariot racing. Inspired by the popular novel Ben-Hur, these authentic chariots drawn by powerful four-horse thoroughbred teams battled every New Year's Day for the next dozen years. During the early 1900s, the Tournament of Roses saw tremendous growth with both participation and attendance. Horse-drawn floats were also becoming larger and more elaborate. The first Rose Queen, Hallie Woods, graced the parade in 1905. Her fellow students at Pasadena High School chose Hallie for the role. In 1910, the founders of the parade, Drs. Charles F. Holder and Francis F. Rowland, were honored as Grand Marshals. As parade entries evolved from flowered-covered carriages to more complex floating creations, movement or animation was incorporated in many floats. However, most animation through World War I was of the flapping wings, turning head, and tail-wagging caliber. Coming up, 12 inches of rain in 48 hours nearly washes out the parade. We'll tell you what happened when we return to Rose Parade Through the Years. "1916 was special for a couple of reasons. First of all, it rained, which is something that's happened only 9 times in the history of the Tournament of Roses parade. But the parade marched on and the fans tolerated the untimely weather to witness the event. Despite the rain, 1916 was also the first year women in bathing suits rode on a float. Also on this cold, wet first day of 1916, Washington State played Brown University, marking the return of tournament football. The 14-0 victory by Washington State was witnessed by a cheering crowd of 7,000 at Tournament Park. During World War I, the parade was a wartime spectacle with patriotic themes predominating. And when 1919 brought peace to the war-battered world, the tournament celebrated with a magnificent victorious peace parade. In the 1920s, while much of the country spent their January 1st on ice, Pasadena and her guests celebrated New Year's with noticeably rosier weather. The noted Salvation Army Band joined the parade in 1920. Today, it holds the record for continuous participation. And although the number of equestrians in the parade was growing, horse-drawn floats were a thing of the past. By the early 1920s, nearly all the floats were motor-driven. The size of these floats increased dramatically as well, and the length of the parade was expanding too. By 1925, the route had become 5 miles long and took 3 hours to complete. As with the parade, the afternoon football game attracted more and more fans. By 1922, Tournament Park was unable to handle the overflowing crowds of nearly 50,000. It was obvious that a stadium was needed. Enter the Rose Bowl. Completed in 1923, all future tournament football games would be played in the new stadium. Another new addition came along in 1924, the Sweepstakes Award. It was created after tournament president W.F. Kreller decided that the most stunning float of the year should be given special recognition. 1927 was the first year the parade had a theme. The theme chosen for the floats was Songs in Flowers. From the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce came Home Sweet Home. And Beverly Hills entered the parade with Sitting on Top of the World. The same year marked the entry of the first non-commercial float entered by a foreign nation, Czechoslovakia. The following year, in 1928, American cities from as far away as San Francisco, Portland, and Chicago were represented. The Pasadena Realtors and, of course, the Pasadena Racing Pigeon Club also made their annual appearances. But the highlight of the year was the city of Glendale's 85-foot-long smoke-breathing dragon, the most sophisticated float to date. In the 1930s, as the country was reeling from the stock market crash, the parade celebration offered a day of joyful distraction, an escape from the realities that gripped the nation. Albert Einstein, a distinguished guest, came to enjoy the parade in 1931. And Pasadena crowds swelled while the rest of the nation heard parade coverage over the radio for the first time. Riding in a coach drawn by 4 white horses, America's sweetheart Mary Pickford was the first woman Grand Marshal in 1933. In 1934, the rainstorm that drenched Pasadena for the 48 hours preceding the parade was one of the worst in the valley's history. 12 inches of rain had saturated the city, but the skies cleared just as the parade began. Appropriately, this parade was themed Tales of the Seven Seas. By 1939, the Rose Parade was already celebrating its 50th anniversary with the theme Golden Memories. Selection of the Grand Marshal has always been the responsibility of the tournament president during his one-year term. The Golden Anniversary Grand Marshal was Shirley Temple, and the man who selected her was tournament president Lathrop Leishman.
In 1937 and 38, she was the queen of the world. This was a little girl that was entertaining people all over the world.
When notified that she'd been chosen as Grand Marshal, Shirley responded, "Oh goody, well I get to wear a badge." Shirley Temple was the second woman to serve as Grand Marshal of the parade. By the late 1930s, the parade had grown to such proportions that it required shortening. The tournament committee stressed quality over quantity and decided to limit the number of entries to 55 floats, 18 bands, and 200 equestrian units. Coming up, find out why this annual extravaganza was nearly canceled in the interest of public security. The story when we return to Rose Parade Through the Years. Since its inception, Grand Marshal of the Tournament of Roses Parade has been an honored title. In the first half-century of parades, such notables as William May Garland, Harold Lloyd, and Leo Carrillo were selected. 2 Grand Marshals wore the badge in 1940, Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy. The Rose Parade marched through the first 2 years of World War II undaunted. In fact, Los Angeles papers estimated that more than 1.5 million people attended the 1941 parade. 11 months and 7 days later, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and the United States joined the war. In the interest of public security, the Rose Parade was canceled from 1942 through 1945. Instead, the country was asked to make a parade of defense bonds. During these 4 years, the tournament held historic token parades. They consisted mainly of a few automobiles carrying the tournament president, the Grand Marshal, and the Rose Queen. 1946 emerged as a joyous year as millions celebrated the end of the war. The Rose Parade returned with the fitting theme, Victory, Unity, Peace. It's obvious that float designers were as eager as the rest of the nation to celebrate the war's end. The tournament presidents who had been denied parade accolades due to the war were brought together to ride in this first post-war parade. Along with the 1946 Grand Marshal, Admiral William Halsey. Those years near the Second World War produced many Grand Marshals who were national heroes. Some had ridden in the token parades, like Earl Warren, who was honored in 1943 and again in 1955. Herbert Hoover held a position in 1945. And General Omar Bradley in 1948. In 1952, the tournament collectively honored the country's Medal of Honor recipients, namely Major Carl Sitter, Captain Louis Mullet, Sergeants Ernest Kuma and Joseph Rodriguez, Lieutenants Stanley Adams and Thomas Hudner, and Captain Raymond Harvey. The years following World War II, the floats bloomed with animation. Although this animation appeared very sophisticated, most of it was operated by hand. In New York, the winter of 1947 will long be remembered as one of the harshest of the century. But in Pasadena, it was sunny and warm. Very appropriate weather for the theme Holidays in Flowers. This 1947 parade was also the first Rose Parade to be broadcast on television. The Governor's Trophy was awarded for the first time in 1950 to the float that best characterized the romance of California. The first recipient of this prestigious award was the city of Inglewood, presenting the 6 flags that have flown over California: the English, Russian, Spanish, Mexican, California Republic, and United States. With original floats like these, the Rose Parade was becoming a favorite international event. The 1950 parade was radio broadcast across the United States and transmitted by shortwave to all of the English-speaking world. It reached an estimated 38 million listeners. Coming up, future and former United States presidents become Grand Marshals when we return to Rose Parade Through the Years. The 1951 Tournament of Roses Parade was seen on San Francisco television via microwave, marking its first network telecast. And in 1955, traveling 3,000 miles coast to coast, the Tournament of Roses Parade made its national television debut in color. An estimated 58 million people watched the parade from their homes that New Year's morning. This was a technical breakthrough and a significant event in the history of television. It also changed the course of parade coverage.
In those early days of the parade, I was permitted to go out there with my microphone and stop the float. I climbed up on the Queen's float, interviewed the Queen while the float waited, climbed back off, and on the float went. Do an interview with people like Hopalong Cassidy and Leo Carrillo and such as that, who were regulars appearing in the parade. George Putnam, my very dear friend for many years, used to interview George.
And I recall the time I was riding along the Tournament of Roses parade, and there were the large roses in the pavement. My horse refused to walk on any one of the roses, thinking it was a hole in the ground.
A parade standard set in 1934 required all horse entrants to have silver-mounted tackings. Although not mandatory today, most equestrians still follow this tradition. Equestrian David Llewellyn rode in 66 consecutive parades from the very first parade in 1890 into the mid-1950s. He appeared with his world-famous Palomino, 1 in a million. At the time, the saddle and trimmings were valued at over $75,000. The Anheuser-Busch Clydesdale horses first trotted along the parade route in 1953, pulling the St. Louis float. They've been popular participants ever since. Here's another float that was quite popular in 1953, the Mermaids from San Gabriel. More than 160 women tried out for the part. As the 1950s came to a close, the tournament featured such hits as the Song of India float. It carried over $10,000 in electronic equipment to operate the organ played by Corla Pandant. And speaking of technology, this giant elephant created by South Pasadena carried 11 people inside to operate the animation. In 1960, Vice President Richard M. Nixon was named Grand Marshal for a second time. 75 Rose Parades had marched or floated down Colorado Boulevard by January 1st, 1964. Symbols of Freedom was the theme of this Diamond Anniversary edition. This year also marked the 50th anniversary of the Rose Bowl game. And former President Dwight D. Eisenhower was the honored Grand Marshal of this celebration. A special 1964 anniversary award went to the Minute Maid float, symbol of world freedom. Occidental Life Insurance took the grand prize with first symbol of freedom. The theme prize went to Freedom Bursts Forth from the Centennial Rose Parade Committee. The sweepstakes trophy, the highest of all awards given to parade entrants, went to Long Beach with the float Diamond Jubilee. When we return to Rose Parade through the years, grand marshals who were out of this world. Plus, we'll get a rare view of the parade from inside a float.
Welcome back to Rose Parade Through the Years. I'm Rob Weller, and today we're reviewing the extraordinary history of the Tournament of Roses Parade. Believe it or not, this is where it's all taken place for more than a century. Now, the parade starts right down here on Orange Grove Boulevard. And this, well, this is the infamous corner where the floats have to turn east to go down Colorado Boulevard. And it seems each year it's this particular area where the floats add a little extra drama to the parade production.
As you can see, these are fairly wide streets, 62 feet wide at the corner, so you wouldn't think there'd be a problem. But when you have a 15-foot wide, 55-foot long float, and thousands of people crowding this corner, making the turn can be a real challenge. There have been several tense moments to take place at this turn. In fact, Bill Welsh, a parade commentator who announced 48 Rose Parades, was once put in a precarious situation by a misguided float.
Here comes the Union Oil Company float. It's a ship with a big thing projecting out from the prow, and it starts to make the right turn, and it isn't making it, and it becomes pretty obvious. Now, I'm in a little fenced-in area. I cannot go back, I cannot go right, I cannot go left, and here comes this thing right at me. And I thought, you know, I'm going to be the biggest shish kebab that they ever saw on television. But people are screaming at the driver of the float, "Stop, stop, stop." Well, obviously, as you can see from my chest, he stopped, and I was not skewered. He backed up, and he went on his way.
Numerous floats have had challenges with this infamous turn onto Colorado Boulevard over the years. It certainly was a formidable task for this float in 1989. On the float, the skiers made things look easy as they raced down the slopes. But on the road, the driver had the slippery assignment of maneuvering this 105-foot-long creation around the bend. Moving extremely slow, the float safely rounded the corner and continued down the parade route. Here's a rare view of the parade from the inside out. Each participant riding on a float enjoys the thrill of passing before hundreds of thousands of people along the route and being televised to millions more around the world. In the 1960s, the Grand Marshals were luminaries from all walks of life. Golf legend Arnold Palmer in '65. Walt Disney in 1966, who would only agree to being Grand Marshal if he could bring some friends along. Bob Hope had been Grand Marshal in 1947. And here, once again in 1969. The 1970s also saw a number of celebrity participants. The Apollo 12 astronauts Charles Conrad Jr., Richard Gordon Jr., and Alan Bean were honored in 1970. Reverend Billy Graham in 1971, and Lawrence Welk in 1972. And the Duke John Wayne was honored as Grand Marshal in 1973. For many, 1976 was the highlight of the decade. The Tournament of Roses Parade was proudly designated as the kickoff event for the country's bicentennial celebration. The theme was America, Let's Celebrate. The Grand Marshal was singer Kate Smith, best known for her rendition of God Bless America. Although Grand Marshals are often the most celebrated guests in the parade, there have always been plenty of famous participants. The 1970s even featured future superstar Michael Jackson and his brothers when they were known as the Jackson 5. Coming up next, learn how the tournament selects which high school bands will participate in the parade. And we'll hear from Grand Marshals Frank Sinatra, Irma Bombeck, and Shirley Temple Black. The Tournament of Roses parade welcomed the 1980s with a venerable Grand Marshal, Frank Sinatra.
I'm excited because I've never done anything like this before, and I think we're going to have a beautiful parade.
Other Grand Marshals honored in the 1980s were such celebrities as Lorne Greene and Jimmy Stewart. Football hero and television star Merlin Olsen joined the great list of Grand Marshals in 1983. Irma Bombeck in 1986.
Promised me a rose garden, and they delivered. 5.5 miles of it. Happy New Year, everyone.
Actor Gregory Peck starred in the 1988 parade. Muhammad Ali also made an appearance. (1989) marked the Tournament of Roses Parade's centennial celebration, and once again, Shirley Temple, now known as Ambassador Shirley Temple Black, served as the parade's Grand Marshal.
I was in this exact spot on this same street in 1939 as the youngest Grand Marshal in tournament history at the age of 10.
The floats of the 1980s were as memorable as the Grand Marshals. Students from Cal Poly University have built a reputation for being extremely inventive with their float designs, including advanced onboard computerized systems that control the animation. This float is a replica of the world's largest living creature, the great blue whale. Measuring more than 100 feet in length, a full-size school bus was needed to power the beast. One of the more adventurous floats of 1983 featured a human cannonball. This flowery cannon propelled a stunt person through the air 30 feet and into a safety net. It was quite the crowd pleaser. Here's a look at this daring feat again in slow motion. In 1989, this entry reminded us of the parade's royal history. The float carried 40 former Rose Queens. The oldest had been crowned in the 1930s. Since 1891, marching bands have been performing on these famed streets, but the size of those bands has expanded dramatically over the years, from just a few dozen members up to several hundred. 1984 presented the largest band to date. The Pearl City Marching Band from Hawaii included 360 musicians and drum majors. Many bands, such as the Salvation Army Band and the United States Marine Band, have been regular participants in the parade. The participating football teams battling in the afternoon Rose Bowl game are also invited to bring their bands and cheer squads along to enthuse the crowd. At least one international band and several high school bands march in the parade every year too. Choosing the high school bands that will play in the parade is a difficult decision. The United States is divided into 15 regions and judged. Then one lucky school is selected from each region to display their musical talents in the parade. Managing this parade is a monumental task, and it keeps the Tournament of Roses folks busy year-round. 935 active volunteers, respectively known as the Men and Women in White, are the lifeblood of the organization. Collectively, they donate over 40,000 hours of time each year to make the Rose Parade the greatest parade in the world. Who was the first amphibian to host the parade? You'll find out when we return to Rose Parade Through the Years. Plus, we'll take a special look back at some of the most memorable floats of the 1990s. We'll be right back. The Rose Parades of the 1990s combined technology and entertainment like never before. Participants still covered their floats entirely with organic materials, but the use of more advanced computers made animation easier to program and offered more versatility. This opened the door for some rather elaborate robotics, thrilling crowds and television audiences. Several floats were solar-powered, a long way from the horse-drawn exhibits of the early 1900s. The last decade of the 20th century had an impressive list of grand marshals. 1991 saw comedian Bob Newhart lead the parade. Voyages of Discovery was the theme for the 103rd Tournament of Roses parade in 1992. Two grand marshals were chosen to reflect this theme: Sir Cristobal Colon, who is a direct descendant of Christopher Columbus, and Ben Nighthorse Campbell, a Native American United States congressman. And in 1993, stage, screen, and television entertainer Angela Lansbury starred in the parade. To boldly go where no Grand Marshal had gone before, William Shatner led the parade in 1994. In 1995, international golf professional Chichi Rodriguez was the Grand Marshal. He was a real hit with the crowd. And in 1996, the Tournament of Roses parade was led by that international star of motion pictures and television, Kermit the Frog. '97 saw Olympic gold medal winners Shannon Miller and Carl Lewis as co-Grand Marshals of the parade. In 1998, Carol Burnett was Grand Marshal and even brought her own camera so she could take pictures of the crowd. theme for the 1999 Tournament of Roses Parade was Echoes of the Century. "100 years worth of events, personalities, and technology provided float designers with seemingly unlimited inspiration. This 1999 parade was a colorful history lesson on wheels. No historical stone seemed to go unturned. From leisure activities to pop culture to space exploration, this float paid tribute to man's first steps on the moon.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Cartoon and comic book characters from the last century were also a popular topic. This dramatic creation celebrated Germany's reunification and the destruction of the Berlin Wall. The concept for this float came from Danielle Ratliff, an 11-year-old girl who even had the privilege of riding on the results of her proposal. Just as the 1999 parade rang out the 20th century in style, the 2000 Rose Parade welcomed a new century with amazing beauty and innovative ideas. The theme of the parade was Celebration 2000, Visions of the Future, and each float predicted trends for the century ahead. For instance, the Theme Trophy Award winner went to this futuristic space community for the new millennium. And this float featured an unusual new mode of public transportation, a roller coaster that winds in and out of city skyscrapers. Today, an estimated 1 million people crowd the streets of Pasadena, California to see this spectacular show. And more than 700 million people around the world see this New Year's tradition on television. Since 1889, annual Tournament of Roses parades have truly been spectacles of color, imagination, and entertainment. All because the people of Pasadena wanted to show off their city and to celebrate their Southern California version of winter weather.
Thanks for joining us for our look back at what's become America's New Year's Day celebration. Now, while we show you the names of some of the fine folks that have helped put this production together, here's a look at some extraordinary floats that through the years have been awarded the Queen's Trophy. That's the coveted prize for the most effective use of roses.